What's up, folks? How's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well. And this is the new generation MacBook Air for 2020. Now, back about 2 years ago when Apple launched this new generation Air, it was awesome in the sense that the design was really sleek. You had the Retina display, but its major drawbacks were the limited internal specifications and the ultra-low profile butterfly mechanism keyboard. Now, Apple has addressed both of these two concerns, which is great to see. We have a keyboard that's very similar to the 16-inch MacBook Pro that we really like. It goes back to a traditional scissor mechanism. Plus, you can upgrade the internal CPU for faster overall performance. We actually have the Core i7 version on this Air, and you can upgrade the internal SSD drive up to 2 terabytes. Now, for the longest time, the MacBook Air was the dominant and most popular PC that you can buy from Apple, and that was until things like the iPad Pro were available. And back in 2018, we actually did a comparison between the iPad Pro and the MacBook Air, and I want to do the same thing with the newest versions of those two products. We have the 2020 version of the 11-inch iPad Pro with the Magic Keyboard, as well as the 2020 MacBook Air. Now, whether you get the 11 or 12.9-inch version of the iPad Pro, one thing is for sure is that they are definitely the most capable and sleekest looking tablets out there, and very suitable for people looking to replace their laptops. That being said, if you're looking for a budget-oriented laptop on the Apple side, I definitely think that the new generation Air is very, very compelling, especially if you get the upgraded CPU options. Now, in terms of the price point, the iPad Pro for the 11-inch version starts at $799. That's the base model version that we're going to be taking a look at in this video. The 12.9-inch version starts at about $1,000. Now, in order to be a true laptop replacement, you definitely want the Magic keyboard or some sort of keyboard attachment for your iPad Pro, whether you get the one with a trackpad or without. We're actually using the one without because the new Magic keyboard with trackpad is not available currently for us at the moment of shooting this video, but that's definitely going to add anywhere between $200 to $350 to your overall system. And if you want to get the Apple Pencil, that's going to add an additional cost, as you would assume. And in terms of the MacBook Air side, it starts in between $799 and goes all the way up to like $1,600, depending upon your specific memory configuration and SSD and processor options. The one that we specifically have is basically the baseline configuration with the upgraded Core i7 processor, which costs around $1,250. Now, from a portability standpoint, whether you get the 11 or 12.9-inch version, both iPad Pros are certainly going to be sleeker, more compact, and slightly more portable than the MacBook Air, although the MacBook Air is super thin. At its thickest point, it's only around 16 millimeters and weighs about 1.29 kilograms. Now, the trade-off of that ultra portability is some people have shown that the iPad Pro, especially the 12.9-inch version, is susceptible to bending and even casual usage. There are plenty of examples out there. In most cases, that's fairly rare. And if you get the 11-inch version that we have over here, that is very unlikely to happen, but can happen, especially if you're kind of rough with your electronic devices, even if you have it in your bag or do a lot of traveling. So in terms of durability's sake, you do have a little bit more comfort and assurance that the Air will hold up to abuse to a greater level. Now, beyond that, in terms of the displays, both devices actually have amazing displays, but the iPad Pro has probably one of the best displays I have encountered on any consumer electronic device, whether that's a laptop or a tablet. Has a 120 hertz refresh rate, is very bright, is rated up to 600 nits. You also have a higher pixel density count, about 265 on all versions of the iPad Pros, and the Retina version of the MacBook Air is pretty much the exact same specifications that we encountered in the first generation Retina MacBook Air. So it's about 2560 by 1600 with a PPI count of about 227. It's a great overall display for a MacBook, but from a pure quality perspective, the iPad Pro has the slightly superior display. Now, from a physical connectivity standpoint, certainly the MacBook Air is slightly ahead by the fact that it does have 2 additional USB-C/Thunderbolt 3 connections. Now, you can adapt these to many different kinds of connections, but you do need an adapter for that. And same thing goes for the iPad Pro, which only has a single USB-C connection, which can be adapted to fit multiple needs. But again, you're going to have to deal with adapters. But in terms of having more physical ports and connectivity options, certainly the laptop is going to be the winner over here. And you do have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack that the iPad does not have. Now, that being said, if you get the Magic Keyboard attachment with the trackpad, you get access to an additional USB-C/Thunderbolt 3 connections, which is nice to see. And I'm sure there's going to be other accessories out there for the iPad Pro that are going to enable more connectivity options for physical ports and future expandability. Now, in terms of using the keyboard and trackpad attachment for the new generation iPad Pro, we don't have that product available to us right now, as we mentioned before. But in terms of using the standard keyboard typeface cover, it's great as a typeface cover. But compared to a real keyboard on a laptop like the MacBook Air's new generation keyboard, it is definitely a lot more comfortable to type with long-term on the MacBook Air. Now, we're actually using the new generation keyboard that ditches the old low-profile butterfly mechanism with a more traditional scissor mechanism for the keyboard itself. Very similar to the 16-inch version of the MacBook Pro. It's very comfortable to type on, gives you plenty of key travel and good tactile sensation and feedback in order to make typing a fun and fairly comfortable experience for prolonged periods of time. And although we still haven't tested out the new Magic Keyboard for the iPad with the trackpad attachment, I'm sure it'll be nice to have a trackpad on an iPad, but until we've experienced that product itself, I would personally still prefer the keyboard and trackpad experience that I get on the new generation MacBook Air. Now, moving forward, in terms of the hardware aspect of things, as we mentioned before, the A12 Z Bionic processor is going to be very, very competitive in terms of its overall sheer processing capabilities. And although it's going to be limited to what applications you can run on iPad OS, which is fairly limited compared to the breadth and width that you're going to encounter on the MacBook Air, which can run Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X natively. The key thing that I want to take a look at is the actual performance differences between the A12 Z Bionic processor on the iPad Pro versus the best processor that's available on the MacBook Air, the 10th generation Intel Core i7 processor, which has 4 physical cores at 8 threads. It can turbo up to 3.8 gigahertz, and the A12 Z Bionic is a 8 physical core processor, which also has 8 GPU cores. And now the only cross-compatible benchmarking suite that we can really use on iPad OS as well as Mac OS X is Geekbench, and although they're still not an apples-to-apples comparison because hardware optimization is different on both platforms. But in terms of the multi-core and single-core performance, from a single-core performance side, they're very similar. Basically, you're looking at 1,200 points on the i7 processor versus 1,100 points on the A12 Z Bionic. But in terms of the multi-core performance, as you'd imagine, having more physical cores, although we have the same amount of threads, you are getting faster performance on the iPad, about 4,700 points versus around 2,800 points on the Core i7 version of the MacBook Air. Now, another thing we can do to test out the internal capabilities of both these two platforms is take a look at the video editing capabilities in terms of how long it takes to export a 3.5-minute 4K project on iMovie on both platforms respectively. And it took around 3 minutes 11 seconds on the iPad Pro versus 3 minutes and 58 seconds on the Air. And keep in mind, we have the same exact transition, clips, cut points, effects on both platforms. And even in that pretty much exact same scenario, the iPad is faster at exporting that video. Now, although from a pure content creation experience standpoint, having a nice keyboard and trackpad is going to be definitely easier to edit videos on the iPad Air side. And if you're just using the touchscreen with a keyboard, definitely going to be tricky on the iPad. But if you have a mouse attached or even using a keyboard trackpad attachment on the iPad Pro, it's definitely going to make video editing and overall content content creation a lot more easier and fun to use on the iPad. Now, lastly, there are two additional advantages that the iPad undoubtedly has over the MacBook Air and indeed many other laptops in this category, and that is one, camera capabilities. You have dual-facing cameras, which is a new addition with LiDAR capabilities on the iPad Pro. One is a 12 megapixel wide, one is a 10 megapixel ultra wide, and you also have 4K video capabilities, and the front-facing camera is a 7 megapixel 1080p camera, and the only camera that we have on the MacBook Air is just a 720p front-facing FaceTime camera. Definitely not as good as what we have on the iPad Pro. The other big advantage is going to be battery life, and although the MacBook Air has always been a leader in terms of battery performance for Ultrabook PCs, and in terms of the actual battery capacity itself, you're looking at a 49.9 watt-hour lithium polymer battery on the MacBook Air, and we have a 28.65 watt-hour battery on the 11-inch and a 36.7 watt-hour battery on the 12.9-inch version of the iPad Pro. Now, to test the battery performance, we actually do a video playback test where we simply run a video on the VLC app in airplane mode with 50% brightness, and we got a total runtime about 8 hours and 4 minutes on the MacBook Air, versus doing the exact same test on both the 12.9 and 11-inch version of the 2020 iPad Pros. We got a total runtime of about 13 hours 27 minutes on the 12-inch versus around 13 hours and 8 minutes on the 11-inch version of the iPad Pro. So certainly in terms of video playback and overall battery capabilities, you're probably going to get longer usage and run times out of the iPads compared to the MacBook Air. Now, beyond all those measures, I would still conclude that from a laptop replacement tablet perspective, the iPad Pro is certainly a leader in its class and really gives things like the Surface Pro a run for its money. And certainly with a capable array of accessories, it definitely makes it a very useful and practical device. That being said, straight out of the box, the latest generation MacBook Air is great for pretty much everybody out there for general computing needs. You can do some multimedia-based stuff for it, but from a budget Ultrabook PC standpoint, it's definitely a leader in its class. And thanks to the fact that you do have upgradable CPU options, more expandable storage, and a great keyboard and trackpad, it is really a no-brainer for anybody out there as a student or anybody looking for a new budget-oriented laptop from Apple. Now, if you are interested to see how this MacBook Air compares against the MacBook Pro in the 13-inch division, definitely make sure you click on the card or in the description down below, because we have that comparison available for you. But other than that, please give us a thumbs up. Make sure you have post notifications turned on, and I want to thank you guys so much for your support. Without you, none of this would be possible. Stay safe and take care.